Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheilla, and our story today is called The Circle of Fire. Now, the little boy in our story lived in North Dakota, way out on the prairies, and this story happened during the days of horses and buggies. He oftentimes would walk across that prairie grass to meet his father, who was plowing fields out of that prairie land so that he could plant crops to feed their family. Well, on this particular day, Sammy, he went out across the prairie. He could see the dust from his father plowing. And he oftentimes, when he got there, his father would see him. And if it was time to go home, he might put Sammy on top of the plow to ride home, or he might put him on top of one of those black horses. Sammy was getting close to where his father was, and suddenly Sammy couldn't yet see his father over the little rise, but he could hear his father hollering at the horses, and he could hear them coming fast. Their feet sounded like thunder as it went over that prairie, and they were coming right toward him. And Sammy thought, what are they doing? As they came over the rise, he could see his father. He had the reins in one hand and he had the horsewhip in the other. And Sammy thought, my father, he never whips the horses. But there his father was. He was yelling at the top of his lungs to the horses to go faster. And he was using that horsewhip. And they were coming right toward him. Well, Sammy was in the tall grass, and being 5, he wasn't very tall. Luckily for Sammy, the horses saw him and veered to the side. But his father, even though he was trying to stop those horses, he went right straight past Sammy. And then he turned the horses around and he came back as fast as he could. And when he got right by Sammy, he pushed the lever on the side of that big plow. And you know, when he plowed big fields, he had 3 horses behind him, the plow in the middle, and horses in front of him. And he pulled the lever on the plow, and the share hooks went down into that hard prairie. And Sammy thought, what is Daddy doing? And as Sammy stood there, those horses plowed one circle after another of double furrows all around Sammy. There were 3 furrows, 3 double furrows. Then there was 4 double furrows. And then Father yelled at the horses to stop. Whoa, whoa, he said. And the horses came to a halt. But before Sammy could say anything, Father jumped off the plow and he ran into that circle and he took a match out of his pocket and he lit that match and he started burning the grass inside of that circle. And Sammy thought, What is he doing? Before Father had lit that grass, he scooped up Sammy and set him up on the plow. Sammy just watched in wonder what was going on. Then, after he'd burnt the grass in the circle, he got down and he made a big circle in the center of that big circle of prairie grass. And he ran over and he snatched up Sammy and he set him down right in the center of that circle he had made in the dirt. And he got down in front of Sammy and he said, "Stay here. Don't go out of the circle. Stay right here. Do you understand, Sammy?" Well, by this time, Sammy was afraid. His head went up and down. And Father said, "Don't leave the circle. Wait for me to come back. I'll come back for you." And then before Sammy could ask anything, he jumped out of that circle, Father did, and he got back on those horses and he started hollering at them to go faster and faster. And as Sammy sat there in the middle of that circle and watched, Father disappeared over the prairie. And Sammy thought, that's the way to home. Why didn't Father take me with him? But Sammy, he had been taught to mind. He had been taught to obey and do what his parents told him to do. So he sat there. He didn't know why, but he sat there. He didn't know that his father had seen a fire coming, and the fire was heading toward their house. And Sammy's mommy and his sister and his little tiny brother were all at home in that house. He didn't know that as soon as his father got there, just like he'd done with the little circle he put Sammy in, he put down that plow into the ground that went all the way around Sammy's home. And those horses started with their wild galloping round and round and round till that circle of dirt around that house got big enough that Father thought that the house would be safe from the fire. Then he started backfiring. What that means is that he got down and he lit the grass all the way around that circle with their little house inside. And he started burning everything in its path back toward the prairie fire that he saw coming toward the house. Well, when you do a backfire, the ground that you have burnt, when the fire or the prairie fire gets as close as that, it has no fuel to burn. The fire in that area will go out, and whatever's in that circle should be safe. Well, meanwhile, back in that circle there sat Sammy. And pretty soon, strange things started happening in that circle. 3 striped gophers came running into that circle. Then it wasn't long till a coyote came running, and he got in the circle. But he looked at Sammy, and I guess he thought, Maybe he wouldn't be safe there with Sammy. So he ran out into the prairie on the other side of that little circle. By this time, Sammy could smell, oh, the smell of smoke, and it was getting hard to breathe. And overhead, there were prairie chickens flying, and there were pheasants and other birds that lived there on the prairie, all trying to get away from the fire. And then all of a sudden, into that circle came a rabbit, and half of its fur was burnt off. And it came over to Sammy, and it tried to crawl right underneath of him. Sammy tried to push him away, but the rabbit wasn't about to go anywhere. And then Sammy saw the prairie fire coming. The closer it got, the harder it was to breathe, and the hotter it was. And when it got to the edge of those furrows that his father had plowed around that circle, the fire continued burning around the circle. And you know how hot a fire is. Do you know how hot it would be to have fire burning all the way around you? Poor Sammy. It was so hot, his little face was blistering, and his clothes kept catching on fire. And he knew that if you got fire on your clothes, you needed to get down and roll. So Sammy rolled around in that little circle in the dirt. Oh, this was awful. He and that little half-burnt rabbit. Sammy thought, I have to stay here. Father told me to stay here till he came. And what Father says always happens. Well, as that fire was blown by the wind, it disappeared, part of it over the edge of that prairie. Oh, Sammy, he felt so bad. He had breathed in so much smoke. And his little face and his hands and his arms, oh, they hurt. But in the distance, he heard the thundering of horses' hooves, and he thought, Father's coming. I knew he would. Father's coming. And his father came galloping over the prairie. He pretty much jumped off of those horses before they even stopped. And he ran over and he scooped up little Sammy. Sammy tried to look at him, but only one eye would open. Oh, because the other eye, the heat of the fire, had made it swell up so badly, Sammy couldn't open it. Father scooped him up and he said, Oh, thank you, you obeyed, Sammy. I was so afraid that the fire would get you. I had to go and save the house with Mommy and your brother and sister in it. But because you obeyed, you're safe, Sammy. I'm going to take care of you now. And Father took off of his sweat-soaked shirt. He wrapped it around Sammy. And that's the last that Sammy remembered, till he woke up at home in his own bed, and he wondered how he had gotten there. Well, Sammy was saved and ended up being all right. Do you know why? Because he obeyed what his daddy told him. And he trusted his father when his father said, I will come back for you. When Sammy grew up, when he was a big man, Sammy remembered that experience out on the North Dakota prairie. He remembered obeying his father and how his father had come back. And you know what? Sammy, who was now a big man called Sam, knew that just like his father, Jesus was going to come back and save him, not from a prairie fire, but from all the bad stuff that's here on this earth. Sam knew that the one thing that he had to do was to obey his heavenly Father, just like he had obeyed his earthly father when he was little. That's our job right now while we live here, is to obey what the Bible tells us to do, because that's God's holy word. And we will be safe, just like little Sammy was. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye now.